Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Nils Vinje, and today I'm excited to bring back my guest, Cameron Marijosius. Cameron, welcome back.
Thanks, Nils. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back because last time in part one, we were talking about emotional intelligence in the broad kind of general sense. And then we got specific into the first two pillars out of five, and we ran out of time. So that's why we had to invite you back and do part number two, which we're going to talk about today. So last time we covered self-awareness and self-regulation, two absolutely big topics, which is why it took a fair amount of time. And today we're going to dig into the remaining three, which are motivation, empathy, and social skills. So let's talk about motivation first, Cameron, and share a little bit of your thoughts on this. And we got some fun stories on both sides because motivation kind of plays a key role, regardless of if you're at an individual contributor level, manager, director, VP, C-level executive. What does motivation mean to you in this context of emotional intelligence?
I think from a leadership perspective and really talking about it this way, it's the want to be there. It's the drive to be there. It's the motivation to come to work every day and want to do a great job and want to deliver great outcomes for your business, right? And I think I tend to hone in on the drive part of motivation when I think about it. And I read something once, kind of thinking about it's all about loving what you do and doing what you love. And a lot of times people think about that and like, I got to find the perfect product, or I got to find the perfect, area that I'm going to get into. And I really need to love everything about it. But it really comes down to, you just need to have that positive attitude and showing up every day and wanting to be there and wanting to do a good job and wanting to deliver. That kind of drives us to work harder. So when I think about motivation, I think, that's the intrinsic kind of emotional side of that.
Yeah. And for me, the loving what you do and doing what you love, that was a long lost thing for at least a decade to probably 12 or 13 years in my professional career, in the beginning part of it, where I had no clue where I fit in the professional world. And my motivation was pretty low during most of those times because I felt pretty lousy about the role that I was in. I didn't know the value I added. I didn't have clarity on where I wanted to go. I was, for lack of a better term, a mess for a number of years. And there were many pivotal things that happened that changed that, but I always struggled with that. Love what you do and do what you love, because I had a lot of love and passion for things that were outside of the professional world. And I'd be curious if you've ever felt that, where, when we think about loving what you do and doing what you love, a lot of times, like sometimes our work just doesn't foot the bill. So in those cases, when you've been there in the past, how have you overcome that? Like, how did you look at this motivation from the standpoint of, okay, I might not be in the perfect place in the world, but I have to make this better because I'm here and I have to, contribute value and show up and do a good job. So how did you overcome some of those hurdles? And I'll share some of my tricks as well.
Yeah, I think I am one of those people that I'm not afraid to just say, this isn't working, right? There's something here that's not working. I need to go do something else. And I think that is kind of what played into that. And even today, thinking about, customer success, and do you stay in customer success or do you go into other, business areas? But for me in this one, I had an interesting one. I had been in GovTech for a long time and I loved this space and I loved what I was doing. Back to love what you do and doing what you love. And I really enjoyed it. And, I took another path for a little while into an entirely different arena. And it just happened to be during COVID. So there were a couple of weird things going on. However, I went down that path, and about a year in, I just realized I had zero connection to the people, to the customers, to what we were doing. It was more of an e-commerce type of situation. And so when I was going from helping people every day to making sure they were safe and living in good communities and had good streets and public safety, to going to making sure that Chanel was making another $400 and selling somebody something, I had lost that connection and motivation to want to continue down that path. And I literally stepped back one day and went, this isn't this is not motivating me to come to work every day. It took me a minute to kind of reach out to my network and go, okay, I need something different. And I found something different, but it was hard. But I knew if I stayed there, I was not going to be adding value to that organization. I wasn't going to be happy every day going in. So it was kind of a mix of the old way of looking at it and the new way of looking at it. But it really was true for me.
Yeah, and I love that you did two things there. One, you recognized that you had lost the connection. So something that perhaps was exciting and even there a little bit in the beginning had changed. And that happens in the course of virtually every role at every level and every job and every company, period. It's going to happen, right? And then you took action and you did something about it. You said, you know what, this isn't right for me. I'm going to make a choice. I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing in order to find something else that is going to give me more connection, that is going to give me more motivation. Because I know that from knowing you personally, when you show up in an environment where you are connected, that motivation just comes and naturally, right? Because you want to do the greatest thing for the customers and for your team and for your employees and all that good stuff. So it takes a lot of courage. Is what I'm trying to say here, to take a step back, to realize that something's not right, you've lost a connection, and then to hit pause. And we're talking about emotional intelligence here, and how you show up is very much determined by your motivation, right? Yeah. How you feel is going to determine how you act. And if you're not motivated, that will absolutely 100% contribute to the actions that you do or do not do, and it will be very apparent. Right? It always is. Despite what you think, how you show up, everybody else can tell, your boss included, whatever level that is, right? And so motivation is one of the single most important things, and it's right in the middle of this pillar number 3, but it just holds so much. And a lot of times I think I struggled early on with, like, how do I motivate myself to do this work? And at the time, there were a number of times where I did have the courage to stop and leave, but there were some times where I didn't. And I didn't feel like I could. I felt nervous and I was afraid to say, you know what, this isn't right, because I didn't know what the next step was. And that was one of the hardest things to overcome. So, one of the ways as I evolved and grew as a professional was looking at not just the work as a whole, but what I was really motivated to do. Even if I wasn't motivated to do the work, I was motivated to learn something new that would help me do the work in a more pleasing and better way for me. And that was a key linchpin, because then I could technically really do any job and still have fun and be motivated, because I was growing my skill set, not necessarily worrying about the rest of the product or whatever the thing was that I was working on. So motivation just plays such a big part. And I think it's paid lip service a lot of times where people say, oh, I'm just not motivated. The reality isn't that you're not motivated. It's just you haven't, taken a step back and say, like you didn't say, am I connected to this? Do I believe in this? Do I want to show up with this? And if the answer is no, even if in tough economic times like we're in right now, it still takes a lot of courage, but it is still important to say, this isn't working. Do you agree?
Yeah, not only for you, but for everyone else, because you're not doing anybody else a favor by sticking in there if you're not connected. And I think you're right. This one gets overlooked a lot because it just isn't the first thing you think about. It's kind of an outcome of being emotionally intelligent in all these other ways, but it is an interesting one.
Cool. All right, so let's move on to pillar number 4, empathy. And empathy is one of those fun loaded terms that has a million different definitions that have been twisted this way and that way in every different direction forever. So tell us a little bit about what empathy means to you in the context of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I think when talking about empathy, I always come back to read the room. It's interesting. We were talking earlier. It's not putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and just trying to think about how they perceive what's going on, because that is often what people think. And instead, it's really knowing how to read the room and practice empathy and by recognizing what is going on around you. Interesting enough, I took an emotional intelligence test on Truity. So if you haven't done that, for those people listening or watching, it's free. You can go do it and just kind of answer some questions to see where it puts you. And I ended up having the superpower of noticing how others are feeling by taking that test. And it says, I'm great at reading the room, being a social chameleon, and bonding over shared experiences. And it was so true. I mean, you and I have done that. And I think it was great kind of sitting back and thinking about all the times that I've been in situations where I have been able to do that. And sometimes people think that you're being quiet and you're not participating if you're not kind of out there and being loud and whatnot. But sometimes it really is just sitting back and understanding what's going on around you, because really kind of taking stock again of what's happening in that room, and then proceeding with whatever's going on, and being able to see how other people in the room are reacting to things or responding to things, or they distracted, or all the different things that are happening, facial expressions and whatnot, and kind of understanding all of that, and then being able to figure out how you're going to interact with that person at that moment in time.
Yeah, and you shared a very powerful story in our last episode in part number 1 about a boss when you were an intern and just laid into you over some copy that you had written. And it was just an absolute disaster of a situation on all fronts. And there is a perfect example of empathy being completely non-existent in that case. There was no attempt or desire for that individual to understand the situation that you were in, which you were probably visibly upset even before the meeting started on account of the news that you heard prior to that time. And the story I like to share around empathy always hits home, and that's from one of my favorite books, and I know one of yours too, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And in the book, one of the examples he shares is that he was on the subway in New York and had sat down at the next stop. A father and a couple of young boys got on the subway, and the father kind of sits back against the chair and just nods his head back against the window. And the boys just start bouncing off the walls. Like they're just going all over. They're causing a ruckus. Everybody in the train's doing the little eye look over thing, waiting to see what the dad's going to do. Nobody really makes a move. So Stephen Covey goes up to the father after a few minutes and says, "Excuse me, sir, would you mind, keeping control of your boys? They're making kind of a ruckus or disturbance." And the gentleman looks up at him with a stone cold straight face and says, "Yeah, sure. I guess they just don't know how to understand or process the fact that they just came from their mother's funeral." I mean, I just got chills right now. I get chills every time I share that story, and I share it frequently, and I still get chills every time because it is such a incredible just visualization of the power of empathy, right? That you are never, ever truly going to know where someone else is coming from, and to remember that before every single interaction you ever go into. Whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, meeting one-on-one or with your boss, somebody on your team, a colleague, a customer, doesn't matter. Everybody else has a world that you will never understand. And you will not never understand. You will never know where they're coming from. And the goal, as you noted earlier, is to attempt to understand, not put yourself in their shoes, because putting yourself in their shoes with your lens on the world isn't going to do you any good, aside from give you some achy feet because you probably have different size shoes. But the goal is to seek to understand someone else's world.
Yeah. And that whole thing, you hit on that in your book too. And when we were going through some of the leadership classes with you, and one of the things that I've always tried to do, because I tend to be one of those people just in my style, is I'll jump into a meeting and I just want to get started. And so I have consciously taken that time to really pause at the beginning of a meeting and just like, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? How are things at home? Like, just things to kind of have that conversation before you get going, because it could derail the entire conversation, or you could talk for 10 minutes and then you've lost the person because they weren't in a state to even have that conversation that day. And it doesn't happen all the time, right? But there are those days where something happened and you may not even need to have that meeting and just kind of move on. And I have been practicing that for the last couple of years since we had that session, and it has paid off. And it doesn't take very long, and literally 3 minutes or whatever it is, to just kind of take that minute and ask. And it's been a good one to learn from.
And you are the perfect example of getting a leadership tool, putting it into action, and getting a result. Right? Mm-hmm. Developing leadership skills does not need to be any more complicated than that. And that's exactly why the B2B Leaders Academy, of which you were a very early member, exists, right? Mm-hmm. Because these are tools that need to be in the hands of leaders, but are not, right? Nobody in the professional world really is ever taught how to lead. And that is a mission that I'm just out there to change. That is what I'm passionate about getting these leadership tools I have into the hands of as many leaders as possible so that they can get incredible results just like you did going through the program.
And they're so simple.
They're so simple. That's it. People tell me all the time, like, duh. And I'm like, yeah, but did you do it? And they're like, no, I didn't. Thank you. I will do it now. And they do it and they get a result. And then we move on to the next one, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be, any more complicated than that. And I've learned that firsthand over and over and over again after more than a decade as a leadership coach at people at all levels. I'm manager, director, VP, C-level in organizations from early stage startups to Fortune 100 companies. I've coached everybody. And the simple fact of assessing kind of and understanding where you are in an area, acquiring a tool, implementing a tool, and getting a result and having coaching to support you all along the way is the recipe for leadership success. And that's exactly what we do inside the B2B Leaders Academy.
Yeah. Well, I have another one of those when we get to the next one, but
let's go to number 5.
It's been a great influence.
Skills. Okay. Go ahead.
All right. No, I was just going to say it's been a great influence on me in just kind of a number of ways. And when I was, thinking through preparing for this, it really comes back to a lot of the skills that we learned during your sessions were around emotional intelligence. And it was those little things that just help you be a better human when it comes to, human first leadership or just being in that kind of space has been great. So when we get in here into social skills in a minute, I have a final story that is kind of a fun one, but I'll tell that to you and kind of connect it back for us. So.
Okay, sounds good. Well, right. Social skills is the pillar number 5. So it's kind of rounding them all out. And this one, I really like this one, and especially the fact that it's number 5, because it kind of takes everything into account and is all about how you show up in the situation, right? So if you're practicing self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, then sometimes you might get thinking too much in your mind, but social skills is all about how you bring all of that to a particular situation. So share with us a little bit about what you think on the social skills front.
Yeah, I think social skills is one of those things that tends to get connected back to personality, right? Are you an extrovert or an introvert? And do you have the ability to interact with people and talk to people? And it was one of those things where, it's really not about your personality. It's about your behavior and your actions and how you use all of those things that and what you're doing. And it's something that you can learn, because I've seen people who are like, oh, I don't know how to do that, or, I'm not comfortable with that. And it's like, well, you don't have to go get on a stage and talk in front of thousands of people. That's not, your ability to influence doesn't have to be that. Like you can bring it down to a simple conversation, and it really helps you in the moment address whether it's a positive situation or whether it's a difficult conversation or whether you do have to present. It's really kind of bringing all of those things together and how you do that. And I think, there's so many components to it, like you said, that come together. But for me, it's really about how you use those skills that and in all these different situations. And, social skills, I think sometimes get put into that soft skills bucket. Like, we're going to go learn some soft skills and how you talk to people and how you answer an email and how you do that. And it's like, no, that's different than your social skills and how you are in a natural environment engaging with other people.
Yeah. And I think one of the pros and cons of just humans, period, is that we are emotional creatures, like we talked about in part 1. And the cool part is you can experiment with this at any point in time. Even in your personal life, it does not need to be in the professional world, but you can do it in both. And think about this, do this exercise if you want to kind of flex on this and see how other people react. So emotions are contagious, and what you feel and how you show up will directly impact how other people that you connect with in whatever situation it is will feel. And I encourage you to, if you're at a gathering or something, even family, or even just dinner time with your family or whoever is your significant other, or just by yourself, wherever it is, show up in an extreme version of you one way, like super excited, super happy, just full of energy, the motivation, just beaming out of you, right? And just notice how other people react to that energy being brought to that situation. Then in the next situation, go the complete opposite. I mean, be down in the dumps, ultimately feeling terrible, and your whole body language is going to change when you do this too. And that is part of other people observing and reading this. But they will absolutely 100% drop the tone of their voice. They will naturally come down to your level. And it's really fascinating just how much power you have. And coming back to what we talked about in the first episode, it's always a choice how you show up, right? And that is one of the most important things. And I think I hope takeaways from our 2 episodes here is that it's always a choice in how to show up. And it's your ability to be aware and to regulate and have motivation, empathy, and then bring it into the right way at the right time for the proper social environment.
I couldn't agree more. I have so many examples of just team meetings, or, how you lead your team meetings, or what you're doing in different presentations, or how you're doing with a group of people at work, especially. It's amazing to watch that happen. I don't think I did it intentionally, but I think, thinking back to different scenarios and different, games you play or things you're doing, or if you're talking at a conference and you come running into the room like you did one day, just the energy and the excitement and how you get people started in kind of engaging with you. I think it's a great example of changing just everything going on in that room. So I think it's a great challenge to a lot of people to try that and see how it is, because it is really kind of fun to play with the people around you and how they're going to respond to you in those scenarios. But I think that's a great one. I had one example. It's kind of off that topic, but really getting back to starting to talk to people and kind of setting that social contract in the beginning of how you're going to engage with them. And I think it's a lesson to learn, for people who are at least even new and probably new to management and new to managing people. When you kind of move from being an individual contributor into managing people, it's scary, especially if you've been their peer and then you have to manage them. Those things are really hard. And I think one of the things that was really interesting, we talked about having a social contract. And when you are first getting a team or meeting a group of people, whether they're the team that'll report to you or the team you're on or your manager, just that situation, kind of having a minute and asking them how they want to, receive information and be communicated to. And instead of starting off by saying, well, this is how I do things. And I was sharing this conversation with a family member recently, and I was all excited because I was kind of talking about just some fun things we were doing with the team and how I engage with my team. And I was telling her the story. And from the other room, I heard a voice go, wait a minute, you ask them how they want to be talked to? Like, you're the boss. You should tell them those things. And I was like, okay, this is why I'm doing these things and not what you're doing from the other room. And it was a huge eye opener of, I would never want to work for that person. I love them dearly, but I would never want to work for them. But I think there's so many of those things out there, and that attitude of, this is just the way that it is. But being able to go in and the tone that would set versus the tone that a social contract conversation would set in saying, how do you want me to communicate with you? Or what is the best way to communicate with you? And then naturally coming to an agreement on that is a way better way to start the relationship than the alternative. And I love that example. And I was so grateful for that voice from the corner a month ago, because it's made for a great story now.
That's perfect. And the impact of that, can't be understated. The potential impact of the group of people in those 2 situations, where one leader comes in and says, this is how I run the show, this is what you're going to do, blah, 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 just like you described. And then the other who is taking a more, I want you to be part of this, right? We're not saying nobody's going to make a decision in a decision committee or anything, but we're talking about, how do you really want to be respected as a person? And the potential impact of those 2 situations on those team members they're night and day, right? On the one hand, if you got the extreme boss coming in and barking orders and everything, well, that's going to make people feel a certain way. How they feel then is going to determine how they act. Right. And that is not going to be limited to just their time at work. So now they're going to take all of that angst and probably frustration and a little bit of resentment, and they're going to bring that home, and they're going to bring that into their house where they cannot get over it because it clouds so much of their day because we spend so much time working. Right. And then they're going to take it to when they chat with their friends. How's it going? Terrible. And you have this big cloud that's going to be over somebody for a long period of time. And before you know it, weeks and months will go by, and the person, and I've been the person on the receiving end of this many times, feels absolutely terrible. Like I start questioning myself, like, is it something wrong with me? What is wrong with me that I can't function in this environment? And then we flip that to the other side in your approach, and treating people as human beings, and working to get expectations on both sides just up on the table so we can agree on things. And they feel empowered. They feel great. They feel included. And if they take that energy home, that's a completely different environment than the other one, right? They take that energy to their friends. How's it going? Oh, you would not believe what exercise we did with Cameron. My boss is just amazing, right? Yeah. And many people that have taken through the B2B Leaders Academy have put the social contract into place, have a step-by-step process. If anybody's interested, there'll be details at the end. But the goal is to bring people along with you, not talk down to them. And one of the most powerful ones, I think it might have been in the group that you were in, individuals said when they did the session with their employees, there was multiple people that literally had tears running down their face for the sole reason, get this, that nobody had ever asked them these questions before. I mean, wow. We have an opportunity, and we talk with people every day, and these simple basic questions of how do you want to be treated, and what are your expectations of me, and what are my expectations of you, had never ever come up in their entire professional career. And now they were so touched by the fact that this leader wanted to take the time to understand how they were so he could more effectively work with them. That was just one of the most powerful stories. I love it. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think it's again, back to it's a simple thing. If you're comfortable having conversations, and most leaders are in this way, it's a simple conversation. It's a simple tool. But I think to that, I remember that, and I haven't had anybody cry, but I have had a lot of people who are like, "Well, what do you want to use?" I'm like, "No, I'm not going to tell you what my preference is just yet. I want to know what your preference is. I want to know, like, do you want to Slack? I want to whatever." And then we'll get into, kind of, okay, now that I know this is where I spend most of my time, or this is how you can expect me to respond, or whatever. And I think they were all just like shocked or more taken back by it. But again, it was so simple. And I think for me, it just sets that foundation of conversation and influence and, coaching, and like they feel like they can come and talk to you. You have that kind of open, it's just a weird way to kind of have that open door in the very beginning and set out the welcome mat pretty early, and be able to really figure out how to have those. And I think that then fortunately, I haven't had to have too many difficult conversations since we've been doing this, but I think that kind of helps too when you get into that, right? There's that trust. There's a different level of conversation that comes with that. And so I just feel like, starting early with people when you go in somewhere new with something like this, a tool like this, just really helps this whole foundation as you move forward. That's been my perspective of it from day one. So
that's it. That's yeah. I mean, that's all it takes, right? All of these things in the world of leadership, there are a lot of conceptually simple, easy to understand, and on the surface might also be infinitely complex topics. But if you get the right tool, and you work with the right coach, and you have the right community, you can nail it no matter what, and you can be confident in any leadership situation. That's my goal, ultimately. So if you would like to get any more information on how to build a social contract, how to be emotionally intelligent, we have training inside the B2B Leaders Academy specifically designed to do that. just go to B2B, letter B, number 2, letter B, leadersacademy.com/join, and you can find out all the details of the program. And I look forward to personally working with you because I get to coach everybody in the program, and it's wonderful. Well, Cameron, this has been an absolute blast hanging out with you for 2 episodes, talking about the ever important and always fascinating topic of emotional intelligence. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your stories and experiences. It's just been a blast. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nil. It's been great. I look forward to next time.
All right, take care.